You are now about to hear
You don't understand.
On the Block with Bryce.
I ain't scared of you motherfuckers.
This is On the Block with Bryce. I'm your host, Bryce Castle. Thank you so much for tuning into the show today. Happy New Year to you. We took a little bit of a break, and it was much needed. I feel a lot better. I hope you're feeling better as well. It's been a crazy year so far. A lot has gone on, and we're going to cover a little bit of it today and so much more. Today's show, the Bill of Rights series, finally begins as we go deep. In future episodes, we'll be breaking down each of the original 10 amendments, but today, a brief history of what the Bill of Rights is, what inspired it, and how it came to be in America. Also, we take a look back to the 1980s and rediscover the most popular slang terms from 4 decades ago. How many do you recognize, and how many might you still use? We restore your faith in humanity this week with the story of a 13-year-old boy who has probably done more to help combat a growing problem in this country than most of us have combined. Plus, UFOs, Gavin Newsome's possible recall, and South Korea's artificial sun burns at 1,000,000 degrees. All this coming up in just a minute. Don't go anywhere. You are On the Block with Bryce. Hey everyone, it's Bryce. You know, with everything going on in our country today, it can sometimes feel impossible to escape the political sphere that seems to have overtaken everything in our lives. Nowadays, one can't even buy a pack of diapers or watch a movie, it seems, without it somehow being connected to what it might say about you and your politics. It probably comes as no surprise when I tell you that this is not a way to live. It is so important to unplug from all of this insanity on a regular basis, even for just a short while. Now, try as I might to remove politics from this podcast, it's impossible right now. While it is important to take a break from things, it's also important to call out the nonsense when you see it and to keep people as informed as possible. That's why Jerk Cat Entertainment is proud to offer alternative forms of media not tied to the political machine to help you find a necessary break from all the bullshit. If we're going to take this culture back and make it apolitical again, it needs to start by doing things that are actually apolitical. Talking about it isn't enough, and actually, it's counterproductive. So if you want to check out something without worrying about what it might say about you or your politics, check out my band Joyride Aviator on YouTube. We play guitar-heavy, metal-inspired pop-punk music who sing about interpersonal relationships, introspection, and dealing with the hardships of life while in your 30s. If that's not really your thing, then you might like our channel Board Games and Brews a little better. In that series, we take a look at modern board games and pair them up with delicious beverages from around the world. They're both amazing hobbies to get into, and when combining them, it creates a genuinely fun experience meant to bring people together to interact, compete, and have fun. As Jerk Cat grows, we're hoping to become a larger force in the apolitical culture within America. We're talking music, talk shows, hobbies, comedy, sports, outdoors, and anything else we can manage. Other more established content creators are already on board with this idea, and that's a great thing. We don't mind competition, and in fact, we encourage it. There needs to be as many people doing this as willing. So check out Jerk Cat Entertainment for a much-needed break away from the political sphere. We look forward to being part of your effort to take the culture back simply by being an active member within it. And now back to the show. So we begin today's episode with some great news out of the People's Republic of Soviet California, formerly known as the State of California, and it's made me very happy, this news, and I know it's made a lot of people I call friends in the People's Republic of Soviet California. I know it's made them really happy as well. Apparently, Gavin Newsome, governor, dictator, tyrant of California, is just a mere 500,000 signatures away from joining the unemployed across the great state of California. He put so many people on unemployment last year, and now he may be there himself. In California, 1.5 million signatures is needed to hold a recall as long as said petition gets in by mid-March of any given year. We are right around the corner from that, but again, 1 million signatures have been lent to that recall petition already, so just 500,000 more. And I really think they're going to get it. I do, because if you recall, see what I did there? Gavin Newsome is the tyrant, disguising himself as a United States governor, who completely shut down California because of COVID-19. People couldn't go outside. People couldn't go to work. You had to wear masks if you were allowed outside if the governor deemed you essential. Nobody could do anything. No one could go anywhere. A bunch of people lost their jobs. A bunch of people lost their businesses and their homes and their livelihood and everything. Everything that makes people get up in the morning. And this one man took it all away. And in the midst of all this unconstitutional fuckery that the governor was committing, he decides that he's going to go out, which you weren't supposed to do, to a restaurant, which was supposed to be closed, and eat indoors, which was officially forbidden, without a mask on, which also was mandated as not okay, around a large group of people, which if you remember, Newsom said you can't have more than, 5 people in your house for Thanksgiving? He's got like 20 people there. And amongst that large group of people inside maskless during a COVID-19 shutdown, who's sitting with him? Only the biggest fucking medical lobbyists in the whole state. And he's glad-handing and rubbing elbows with everyone and laughing and having a good time at a $500 a plate dinner at some fancy restaurant up in the Bay Area or up in Napa Valley. Whatever. The point is, here comes this guy, this tyrant, locking everybody down, squeezing them for all he can, breaking people, bringing people to the point of absolute poverty, losing their businesses, losing their livelihood, losing their homes, losing everything. And he's glad-handing with a bunch of people who line his pockets at a dinner having a great time. And what was his response when he was caught with it? Just a big stupid grin and a, sorry, I'm not perfect. No. Fuck you. That is the sentiment held by Californians across the state. Here's something you need to realize about California. California is not as blue as people think. It's just that where most people live in the state, that happens to be the bluest pieces of the state, and it's a large population of left-leaning people. But the farmers, all the people who live in the north, in the mountains, in the woods, all the people in the countryside who grow things and build things and make things, they are not left-leaning. And Gavin Newsom has affected all of them as well. And so I really do think that they're going to have the signatures by mid-March to make this happen. This is going to cost Newsom a seat, and I couldn't be more happy. You see, the reason I couldn't be more happy, even living in Arizona, is that Gavin Newsom's policies, his lockdowns and his high taxes and all this bullshit that he imposes upon everybody, his tyrannical rule causes people to flee California. They come to Arizona, they go to Texas, they go to Florida, they go wherever they can to get away from all these high taxes and all this bullshit. Except they bring their politics with them, and then it turns Arizona blue, it turns Texas blue, it turns Florida blue. I don't know what's wrong with people, but I'd rather them stay where they're coming from if that's going to be the case. So with Newsom gone, maybe they'll make some better decisions and not overpopulate my state and drive up prices for everything. So that would be nice. And I'm sure Texas would agree as well. So if you're listening from California and you haven't signed that petition yet, seek it out and give it a sign. Give it a read, of course. Don't just sign it. Read things, make sure it says everything you want it to say, but then sign that motherfucker and tell your friends to sign it as well. This should be a thing everywhere. This should be happening in Michigan with the governor. This should be happening in Oregon, in Portland with that stupid idiot mayor Ted Wheeler, who has finally decided to let the police do their job in the city of Portland, only after everyone's been terrorized by Antifa all year. This should be happening in Seattle. It should be happening in Chicago. It should be happening in Pennsylvania. Anywhere where a mayor or governor has decided to act like a tyrannical dictator in the name of a disease, not even a disease, an illness that has a 99.7% survival rate, yeah, they need to be removed. A recall needs to happen, and you need to put someone in there who, at the very least, is not going to get high off of their own power. Because once that starts happening, it can't stop. You can't turn it off. These are people who would be this way whether they were a governor or whether they were a manager working at McDonald's. And believe you me, if there was no constitutional provisions that held him back, eventually Newsom would have people killed who didn't follow along with him. History has been very, very clear on this. If you took all the restraints away from these people, eventually they would kill you if you didn't follow exactly what they told you to do. And it's important to realize that when you vote for these people. And that's why it's so important for people to remain involved in their government, because you have to look at people like this and you have to oust them immediately, especially in the name of this COVID thing. I mean, we're getting to a point now where so many lives have been ruined. So many people have lost everything, and yet the lockdowns remain. It's very clear that the lockdowns don't work. I mean, somebody has to explain to me why Florida, who never locked down, is seeing far fewer cases and far fewer deaths than a state like California, who technically have never reopened. California's been locked down since March of last year. You would think that if lockdowns were effective, California's numbers would be going down or would be significantly lower than a state like Florida, so obviously the lockdowns don't work. And we have seen time and time again, not just Gavin Newsome, but the mayor of LA, that public health lady who closed restaurants down and then went to one. We're seeing them flaunt their power because they do get off on it. And here's something else to consider about COVID as well. The number of people who have died last year, not related to COVID, was particularly high. A lot of suicides from people who are being locked away from everybody they know. A lot of people who had heart problems didn't go in for their cancer treatments. It's getting to the point where the cure is becoming worse than the disease. If 16 people killed themselves from depression and loneliness from the lockdown, but you saved one person from possibly dying of COVID, you consider that a success? Yeah, they gotta go. There's a lot of qualified people in California running for office right now. There's a young guy, I forget his name. Oh, it's one of those names, too, that when you hear it, like, it hits you. Major Williams. That's the guy's name. It's Major Williams. He's a relatively young dude. He's got a website, I think, called majorforgovernor.com. That may not be it, but just type in Major Williams. Check him out. He's running for governor for 2022, but why wait until 2022 when you can get him in 2021? This guy doesn't seem to be interested in keeping you locked down in your house forever. He has a lot of comprehensive ideas, and if you're looking for a replacement for that fucking tyrant of a man, Gavin Newsome, this might be your candidate. I'm sure there's others as well. I like Major Williams personally. If I was still living in California, he would have my support. And that's pretty much all I have to say about that. Coming up in just a minute, South Korea's artificial sun and possible UFO debris flying past Earth. Do these things have something in common? It would sound like they do, but in reality, they really don't. However, I thought they were fascinating topics anyway, and I wanted to discuss them with you. That's coming right up. This is On the Block with Bryce. You'll never catch me in a mask while outside or in my car. If I'm at a store, I'll only put one on anymore if asked to by an employee. You'll never see me voluntarily take a picture in a mask. I will always call out the inconsistency and illogical nature of the so-called rules regarding them. If Biden asks me to wear one, I'll tell him to go fuck himself. I will patron any business that is brave enough to remain open during a lockdown. If I ever get ticketed, I won't pay the fine. If I ever get penalized or jailed, I'll hunger strike, sue, and appeal as many times as needed. These lockdowns and mask mandates while in your own house or outside are in direct violation of the First and Fifth Amendment along with others. I do not recognize these policies as constitutional, and it is my duty as an American to not obey them. I will not normalize these masks. I will not normalize this pandemic of fear. I will not normalize the government telling me what is and isn't essential. I will not normalize authoritarianism. I will not allow mainstream media to saturate me in only what they determine to be the truth. This is a free country. But there are tyrants in positions of power who seek to expand their authority wherever they can. They're currently testing to see just how much they can get away with. These masks and lockdowns are not about safety. The true data on this virus has made that very clear. It's all about control. They found success in these masks and lockdowns, and their push for the vaccine is coming. Remember, they're only men. They're not your leaders, your gods, your parents, or your friends. So when they try to see just how much authority they have over me, they'll find that my answer for them is none. What will your answer be? So you may have noticed that this show is running a little differently than the last one. You may have noticed that this season is a lot different than the one before. Like I said, we're changing things up. We're trying to fine-tune the show to make it more entertaining, I guess, less political, more entertainment. And, we're working on it as we go. I went into season 2 without much of a plan. And so I'm just kind of stumbling along, picking the things I like, getting rid of the things I don't. I hope you are at least enjoying the creative process with me. And moving on. South Korea's artificial sun burns at 100 million degrees for 20 seconds, sets new world record. This comes from India.com. I found this article, and the first thing you'll see within the article, if you check it out for yourself, is this giant industrial monstrosity that is South Korea's artificial sun. I didn't even know this was a thing. Their artificial sun, according to this article, is called the Korea Superconducting Tokamak Advanced Research, or K-Star. And K-Star had set a world record by burning at 100 million degrees for 20 seconds. I want you to keep in mind that the sun that lights up our sky, that heats up the earth, that shines throughout all the galaxy, it only burns at 15 million degrees at its core. So the hottest part of the sun only burns at 15 million degrees, and the South Koreans got their artificial sun to burn at 100 million degrees. Now, when you look at this artificial sun, it's kind of like this round thing. It's got all these pipes and platforms all over it. It's really quite amazing. My first thought is, I'm sure the center of it is where the sun burns, and I'm sure that it's made of all sorts of material that can handle that type of heat, or maybe the heat is happening in ways that I'm not quite understanding. But my first thought, nonetheless, is what if there was a crack in that wall, and that energy, that heat just bursts out into the room? Like, how fucked would the whole world be? Like, because the planet can't handle that type of heat. I think we would be pretty fucked. I think that the nearest area, I think the building at least, would be pretty fucked. So that's where my first thought went. But this is actually quite an amazing feat that they've been able to do this, because the sun, as you know, produces heat, which is essentially energy. The idea that 100 million degrees could be burned for 20 seconds, terrifying as it might sound, this also means that we might have a way to create artificial energy. We could use this type of energy to heat shit and grow things and essentially solve a lot of the world's problems. We could burn trash, perhaps. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff we could do. And the fact that the South Koreans have been able to do this, I mean, I hope they know what they're doing. I hope there isn't somebody out there that's a little too ambitious for their own good. That brings back to like Jurassic Park, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Kind of freaky, but if you can get some good out of it, I say why not? I'm curious to see what they're able to do with this energy-producing machine in the future. Next up, we have a story about UFO technology for you. Of course, whenever anything UFO-related hits the news, I have to talk to you about it because I find this topic fascinating. A piece of space junk, or supposed space junk, flew by Earth in 2017, and after a couple of years of research, it has been theorized that it's not actually any type of like rock or asteroid or anything like that, but actually a piece of thrown away technology created by a distant alien civilization, according to a Harvard professor. This comes to us from Business Insider. And, obviously, anytime you talk about intelligent life elsewhere, making contact with Earth in any type of way, you're going to get a lot of people raising eyebrows, or you're going to get Tom DeLonge from Blink-182 doing some sort of cartwheel or backflip. I will say this. It's mathematically impossible that we are the only intelligent life out there. Now, how possible is it for us to come in contact with each other? I don't know. You would have to figure out a way to bend space and time, because you're not going to be able to travel there, even at the speed of light. Certain things are 100 billion light years away, so even at the speed of light, it won't work. But apparently this object found floating through space near Earth a couple of years ago was a flat, shiny, kind of reddish colored thing with a shiny surface, and they're saying there's no way that was an asteroid or a piece of ice or anything like that. So it had to come from somewhere, and it looks like it was constructed. Like certain things don't take shape naturally. Certain things you can just look at and be like, no, that was created by something. And that's what they're saying that this is. They don't have a really good picture of it. In this article in Business Insider, they have a computer picture of it and what they think it might look like. But those telescope pictures, it's just a big white blank screen with a bunch of black dots and circles all over it. But I don't know how they come up with the shit they come up with just by looking at that crap. Obviously more intelligent people than myself. But I thought that was interesting. This is not the first time recently that we have been talking about intelligent life making contact with Earth in some way. The government just last year admitted that there are things flying around in our sky that they have no idea what it is. And when I say government, I mean Air Force and all these. Now, they could be lying. Obviously, they could be lying. But the fact that people are finally coming out and going, yep, have no idea what that is. It's not ours. It's not anyone we spy on. No clue. It's almost like they're kind of slowly starting to admit that they know something maybe that the rest of us can only speculate on. So who knows, maybe someday soon somebody will make contact and they'll spend 3 days on Earth and they'll be like, fuck this, I'm leaving. But time will only tell. All right, coming up, we have 20 of the most popular 1980s phrases used from 4 decades ago. We're going to check them out, see what they mean, and determine whether or not we still use them today, at least in some capacity or another. Don't go anywhere. It's going to be a lot of fun. This is On the Block with Bryce. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no denying it. 2020 has brought America to the precipice of a serious shift in how our country operates moving forward. Continuous lockdowns, record spending, an election fraught with suspicious irregularities, and the largest transfer of wealth to the 1% the world has ever seen are just a few of the things which have happened that are guaranteed to leave this country unrecognizable if left entirely unchecked. At the heart of each of these occurrences is our federal government and the career politicians who occupy it. For years, most of us have known of their ineptitude, corrupt behavior, baseless lies, finger-to-the-wind decision-making, and catering to the lobbies of the corporate elite for huge payoffs rather than their constituency. In 2020, they flaunted all of this in our faces like never before and will continue to do so because they not only think you're too stupid to call them out, but because they really do believe they are entitled to do so. It's time to say enough to these lifelong leeches of the government dole. It's time to hold those who pass laws against the interest of our country in exchange for lobby dollars accountable. It's time to say enough to wars enacted without congressional approval. It's time to demand more transparency from our intelligence agencies. It's time to refuse every attempt of these political hacks who get off at chopping away at our rights. It's time to ensure that they cannot continue to sit in their seats growing drunk off of decades of power. Thankfully, our founding fathers foresaw the possibility of a bloated, overreaching government and made sure the people always had a voice and a way to quell this undeniable threat to our liberties. A way to ensure that revolution would never be needed again so long as everybody played their part. This answer can be found in Article 5 of the Constitution of the United States, which allows for amendments to be added on behalf of the states so long as 2/3 of the respected states' legislatures call for it and 3/4 of said legislatures vote them in. This is called a Convention of States, and it's supposed to ensure that the federal government can never own a monopoly regarding the laws of the land. This also includes rejecting proposed amendments from the federal level as well. Now, I'm willing to bet most of you were unaware that this was a thing we could do. I'm also willing to bet that this alone probably hasn't bolstered your patriotism to exciting levels. But guess what? Those career political leeches have counted on that for over a century now. But what if I told you Article 5 would allow you to demand and see to that politicians could make no more than, say, $70,000 a year? What if I told you that Article 5 could put into place permanent term limits across the board at the federal level? What if I told you that Article 5 could eliminate pork fat on federal bills that are passed as laws, ensuring only the topic at hand is voted on? And what if I told you that Article 5 could make it a criminal offense to accept lobbyist money? More importantly, what if I told you that as of now, all it takes to help the state legislatures move forward towards holding a convention of states is a quick online signature? Would that perhaps bolster your patriotism? Because I'm not lying. Folks, if you want to make sure this country stays free and that your inalienable rights remain recognized by your government, all it takes is a few minutes of your time. Head on over to conventionofthestates.com and sign off on the online petition today. Your signature puts us one step closer to taking this country back from the plutocratic stranglehold it is in. 15 states have already passed a resolution to hold a convention, with 8 more halfway there and another 16 with active legislation for it. That puts us well over the mark needed to hold a convention if enough signatures are collected. With the next generation of politicians up and coming, disillusioned from the swamp-like environment they grew up around, and in favor of clamping down on the federal government, there has never been a better time to call a convention of the states. So head on over to conventionofthestates.com and sign the online petition today. Tell 4 of your friends and have them sign it too. conventionofthestates.com. Let's help take this country back. Okay, so next up, I thought this would be kind of fun. The 1980s. What do you remember from the 80s? Were you even around in the 80s? I was born in late 1988, so my memories of the 80s are pretty much none. But there's a lot from the 1980s that's actually still around, and I'm talking more than just yoga and spandex pants. I'm talking about our lingo, our slang, the way we talk. BestLife.com has found 20 slang terms every 1980s kid will remember. And funny enough, after looking through this list, I realized that a lot of these slang words we still use today. So even if you weren't around in the 80s, or if you don't have any memory of the 80s, you might still look at some of these words and be like, oh yeah, they've been using that for 40 years. That's cool. Might make you feel a little old, but that's okay. Let's take a look at some of these words and see how many we remember and how many we still use. So at number 20, we have, what's your damage? I haven't heard anyone say this in a long time. I think we now just say, what the fuck is wrong with you? Because that's essentially what what's your damage mean. What the fuck is wrong with you? Don't think we use this one today, so that one probably died somewhere in the early to mid-90s. Number 19, bad. This meant it was good. In the 1980s, if you said something was bad, it meant it was good. The Michael Jackson song and all that, be like, oh man, that's so bad. Now this one is still used. It's been kind of relegated to just females, from what I understand. Like, oh, that's a badass chick right there, or that's a badass bitch. I know there was that song called Badass Bitch that came out a couple of years ago. That's the only time I've ever heard it still used, is when referring to females that you like or females who are awesome. You refer to them as bad. So, still around. Moving on. Number 18, and I had never heard of this one before, barf me out. That just sounds really gross and weird. Kind of almost has a disgusting sexual connotation to it. But if somebody was to say barf me out, they were really letting you know just how physically appalled they were at a specific topic or person. The example the website uses is a quotation saying, he's wearing jam shorts to church? Oh, barf me out. Sounds a little too close to eat me out, and I don't want that being associated with barf, so I'm glad that one died. Never heard anyone say that before, and for good reason, thank God. Number 17, and I really like this one, bag your face. Pretty straightforward. If somebody was disgusted with the way they looked or the way somebody else looked, somebody was ugly, whatever, you simply suggested that they bag their face. I mean, it's really mean, but the imagery of it is very, very funny, and I haven't heard anyone say that before ever, but I hope this one makes a comeback. Bag your face. That's a good one. Number 16, fat. PH fat. This is definitely a hip-hop word. It meant same thing like bad. If something was cool, or like really cool, you really dug it, you were like, hey bro, that shit's fat. It's really cool, it's awesome. Probably died out early 90s like most of these. The next one, number 15, choice. If somebody was to call something choice, it's basically saying like that's the shit right there. That's the thing. It's a term of approval, possibly even envy, according to the website. If you were saying that this situation is choice, or man, if I had that cheeseburger, that's so choice right now. Not a lot of people still use it, but it is still used today. I actually can remember where I was the last time I heard somebody say it. Not a very popular word, but choice, number 15, still used today. Okay, number 14, word. This one is also still used today. It's basically saying, like, oh, really? Or I agree. It can mean one of the two things. It depends on what context you're using. So, like, if somebody goes, hey, man, I really like that movie, and you agree with it, if you concur with it, you go, yeah, word, that movie was fat, or it was choice. Or if somebody says something and you're asking, like, really? Like, if they go, dude, that movie was shit, don't go see it, and you go, oh, word? That's the two ways you can use it. Both are still used today. Number 14, word. That's 2 in a row, but still used today in 2021. All right, number 13, moving right along here. Tubular. Do you remember tubular? Oh, dude, tubular, bro, tubular. It just meant shit was like really, really cool. Haven't heard this one in a while. It's kind of a weird one, tubular. I don't know, moving on. Number 12, gnarly. Now, this is a word I still use every now and then to describe something. You can use it to describe something that's very difficult or dangerous. You can also say it was cool or awesome. You can even use it in its actual context in saying that something is really awful or gross. I usually use it for like negative stuff, like if somebody, I don't know, bashed their teeth in while skateboarding, they face planted into the concrete. That's a fucking gnarly injury right there. At number 11, we have the word bounce, and this one is also still used today. This is definitely a hip-hop term, or at least the first time I heard it was hip-hop music, like, yo, let's bounce, meaning let's leave. That's it. either to bounce out, means to leave. In fact, I think that's what it's turned into, bounce out. Like, I'm about to bounce out. Also, you say dip out, or you can just say I'm about to leave. But yeah, when it's time to bounce, it's time to go. At number 10, we have the word Zeke. Never heard this one before. It's short and sweet, though. It's if a geeky person, somebody who's like a nerd or a geek, has sex appeal, you call them a Zeke. Hot nerd girl, circa 1983, I guess. I don't know. That one's not used today at all. So, moving on. Number 9, bod. Well, we definitely use this one today still. I didn't know it came from the 80s. I thought it came from maybe the 90s. Sounds like a 90s word, doesn't it? Bod. No, he has a great bod. She's got a great bod. But I don't know. The gym shit was really big in the 80s, so I guess it makes sense that bod came out of the 80s. But yeah, in the 80s it meant if you were a gym rat, you had a nice body. Still means that today. We like to abbreviate things a lot today, so now we use it to say, just a way to abbreviate the word body, as if the Y was much too much to say. We don't have time for just one Y anymore in our culture, but okay, whatever. Bod, number 9. At number 8, we have the term butter, and I've never heard anyone describe anything other than butter as butter, but apparently in the 80s, if you were to describe something as butter, you were describing something as smooth. The example the website uses, the article uses, is, nah man, you gotta peg your pants. That's butter. I don't know what pegging your pants means. I know what pegging means. I'm starting to envision butter used as lubricant. I don't know. We're moving on. Number 8 was butter. Number 7, chaw. You ever heard anyone say that? I think I've heard it in movies. It's basically just like saying yes, like a very drunken, random assortment of letters and sounds out of your mouth to make up cha. So like if somebody's going like, hey bro, you going to that party tonight? Cha. Really weird one, and I am glad we don't use that one anymore. We have a hard enough time looking like legible, well-spoken adults in the modern day without using a bunch of made-up words that just sound like randomized sounds. So, number 7, cha, take it for what it is. At number 6, we have the term grindage. Does anyone remember this one? This means something different than I would have guessed. I thought it was a skateboarding term, like if somebody did a grind trick on a rail or something, and they did it for a long time, or they did it really well, I would have guessed it meant they got a good amount of grindage. But apparently, this comes to us courtesy of Pauly Shore. Do you remember Pauly Shore? The 80s definitely remembers Pauly Shore. Maybe the 90s too. I don't know. He hasn't made a movie since like 1994. But anyway, he created this term, and apparently it means delicious food that you intend to chow down on with extreme enthusiasm. So, if you really want to freak somebody out, next time you go to their house, ask them if you can help yourself to the grindage in their fridge. See what they say. Number 6, grindage. At number 5, we have the word grody. Now, I have heard this term used before. It's not used a lot, and it amuses me. The word grody amuses me. Apparently, it means if something can't get any more disgusting, like if it's like really gross. Grody means gross. I'm not going to say the word survived. I think it's used, here and there sporadically. But in the 80s, if you were going to say something is grody, it means it's really gross. At number 4, and I don't know how long this one survived, but I do know it survived out of the 80s. I just don't know if it made it into the 2000s, and that is the phrase no duh. Basically, it means obviously. So if somebody, asked you, hey, is the sky blue? And you go, yeah, no duh. A fine replacement for this term would be no shit, which is something I say a lot. And I think it's something most people say a lot. So no duh evolved into no shit. Or maybe no shit was always around, and no duh grabbed its coattails for a while. It was like the PG version, and people just dropped it. Because I haven't heard anyone say it in a long time. Although I do hear people use the word duh every once in a while. But we'll say it didn't survive. All right, number 3, and this comes to us courtesy of The Simpsons, have a cow. If someone's having a cow, they're getting really emotional, and we all remember Bart Simpson. Hey, don't have a cow, man. Calm down, relax, you're getting emotional, don't get so upset. Having a cow. Not sure where this came from, not sure which writer on The Simpsons came up with it, but I do remember it being very, very popular back in the day, all the way up until probably the mid to late 90s. Are The Simpsons still around? I don't know. I wonder if Bart's still saying that. I haven't seen the Simpsons episode in goddamn nearly 20 years, so I don't know. But number 3, don't have a cow. Now, number 2, I have never heard of this before, and if you were around in the 80s, I have to ask you, what the hell Where did this even come from? Number 2, gag me with a spoon. Again, the sexual connotations here. If somebody asked you to gag them with a spoon, basically, according to this article, you're so disturbed that you want to test your gag reflex. This one doesn't make any sense. This one is just weird. Why would you want to gag? Again, if we're thinking sexual connotation, I guess there's a small group of people out there who are into the whole gagging thing, but why would you ever want to gag? Even if you found something repulsive, why would you want to gag? It doesn't look good. It certainly doesn't sound good, of course, unless you're into that shit, which yours truly, not really. And so, gag me with the spoon. I'm very glad that one stayed in the 80s where it belonged. It probably didn't even belong in the 80s, but apparently people were obsessed with being gagged with spoons. I don't know. And moving on to number 1, and this is something that probably has survived. I think it evolved, and that is not even, which is just a way of saying I think you're wrong, but I'm too lazy to get into a whole thing of why. So basically, you're shutting down an argument. Somebody was like, dude, that movie was so good. Ugh, not even. Yeah, I remember that one. I remember that one being used for a long time. I think it evolved into I can't even. Like, I know kids say that, like, oh my god, I can't even right now. Which essentially means the same thing, except you make it more about yourself, which I guess is par for the course for our generation. It is the millennial generation after all. But yes, number 1, not even. That is something that was said a lot by kids back in the day. And there you go. There was 20 slang words that kids used in the 80s, some of which are still used today. Others, very glad that they stayed back in the 80s where they are better left in the 80s. Yeah, it's funny. Language is a funny thing. Who knows what words will be looked at with a head scratch 40 years from now, right? Like, what things do we say now that people will look at, half a century later and be like, what the hell? I know we're not saying anything as stupid as gag me with a spoon, thank God, but maybe society will change and they'll look at us and be like, dude, you talk like a fucking moron. Time will tell. Well, that was a lot of fun, and you know what? I'm glad we took that time to have that much fun, because when we come back, we're going to get pretty serious. We have a big topic today. The Bill of Rights series is finally here. We're going to sit down and go deep with the philosophy of what the Bill of Rights is, how it came to be, and the general overall history of it. Before you start talking about any of the amendments, it's first important to know specifically why they exist and the influence behind them. So when we come back from the break, we're going to go deep, and I'm going to introduce you to the philosophy and history of the Bill of Rights. I'm so excited to finally be able to do this with you. That's coming right up in just a minute. Don't go anywhere. You're not going to want to miss this. This is On the Block with Bryce. Hey everyone, it's Bryce. Real quick, I would be a little more than somewhat remiss if I didn't at least mention on this show the events at the Capitol last week. I have a lot to say about it. I have a very different and unique perspective than I've heard other people give on it. I'm looking at this entirely in a different way, but I don't quite have all my thoughts laid out just yet. It's still just a bunch of random thoughts, and I'm still connecting pieces. I want to give you my opinion. I want to share with you this kind of unique perspective because I think it's something that people should be considering. If only to tell me that I'm crazy, that's fine. I still want it out there. I still want it a part of the conversation. It's just not ready yet, but you can expect it next show. Even if it takes up the entire show, I want to lay out this thought process for you in a clear, accurate, concise way, and that's why it's waiting until next episode. But sit tight, it will be here, and it's not like the event will be forgotten in 2 weeks. So in the meantime, I hope you enjoy part 1 of our series on the Bill of Rights coming at you right now. The United States Bill of Rights. What do you know about this nearly 230-year-old piece of parchment? Is it simply just a piece of American history, or is it something much greater? What about it makes it so important? What specifically was ratified in December of 1791, and how does it apply to us today in 2021? Maybe even more basically, how many amendments are there in the original Bill of Rights, and what exactly, maybe even just roughly, are they? Do you know any of this? Odds are your take on this subject is cloudy at best, and you're not alone. A recent poll conducted last October shows that only 26% of American adults surveyed knew exactly how many amendments actually made up the original Bill of Rights. Half of those surveyed mistook it in part for the Declaration of Independence, and an astonishing 20% of American adults surveyed had absolutely zero clue as to what the Bill of Rights even was. This lack of education in America's most important founding document is more problematic than you might realize, and if you ask me, it's been done on purpose. A lack of even a basic understanding of this document not only means one might not ace their next civics test, but also that they lack a general understanding of what the document stands for. They lack the awareness and the ideals of enlightenment, natural law, principles of individual sovereignty, and what they all mean. They fail to conceptualize what a rare position in human history they are in to live in a country with a government that, for the most part and for now anyway, abides by those principles by its own will without a drastic use of continual force. Again, for now anyway. And probably most disturbingly, they have no idea of what unimaginable, incomprehensible horrors they are potentially setting themselves up for by not knowing and in many cases applying these things. Of course, these are all very deep and philosophical topics that would take a lifetime to unpack and explore. That's a pursuit best left to you on your own time. What this series of segments is designed to do is to briefly tap into those topics by introducing you to the United States Bill of Rights. In the episodes to come, we will be discussing each of the original amendments written into the Bill of Rights, what they say, what they mean, why they're so important, and how they've been interpreted, defended, and even ignored over the course of our history. Now, some of these rights are a lot more dense than others, so we may have to split certain rights into two parts, while others, while equally important, might be able to share an episode with each other, but we'll see how it plays out. By the end of this series, hopefully you will not only be more familiar with what amendments are written in the original Bill of Rights, but also you will be more immersed in the theology behind the Bill of Rights, that you will have the desire to delve deeper into the principles of enlightenment, natural law, liberty, and the American ethos. These are very important weapons in the arsenal that fight against oppression and tyranny. This is as true now, perhaps even as true as it's ever been, as it was in the 1760s when merely a handful of British subjects within the American colonies decided that it was time to put those principles to work, thus changing the course of human history forever. The American Bill of Rights was and continues to be the driving force behind that incredibly miraculous shift, making it far more than just simply an old piece of parchment. But before we dive into what the Bill of Rights says, it's important to know the history behind it, and that's where we're going to start today. By May of 1787, America had been officially recognized as its own nation for just over 3 years. The Revolutionary War, America's war for independence, would prove to be in the centuries to come one of the most important and influential events in human history. In the spring of 1787, however, it was a costly effort that took the proverbial training wheels off a collection of colonies a little too early for their own good. America had done the impossible, but not without procuring monumental amounts of debt and having no real clear path forward in regards to just about, anything. At the time, there were no states, and there was very little in regards to national laws that everyone abided by, and each of the colonies were so different in terms of culture, needs, and customs, it was thought that this newly found country might dissolve as quickly as it had began. The problem lied within the Articles of Confederation, America's original constitution from 1777. Now that America was its own nation, the federal government needed a way to maintain a national defense, collect and levy taxes, establish a treasury, and ensure that each state ran in at least a very minimal accordance with some form of national identity. The original document that directed how America was to run as a nation simply left the federal government too weak and without any real legal power to do anything greatly effective in those areas. Many of the colony's delegates realized this, and by the spring of 1787 had gathered in Philadelphia for the Second Continental Congress. The original goal was to make edits to the Articles of Confederation, but it wasn't long before the plan was scrapped in favor of drafting a whole new constitution altogether. The Second Congress had problems from the very start. Set to begin in early May, it wasn't until the end of the month when most representatives from each of the colonies finally showed up. The colony of Rhode Island didn't actually send anyone, and it's the only colony who did not lend any signatures to the final document. While big names such as Thomas Jefferson and John Adams did not attend due to being overseas at the time, other important figures such as Patrick Henry, John Hancock, and Sam Adams, yes, he was a real person, refused to attend. Henry was quoted as saying that he smelled a rat in Philadelphia, tending towards the monarchy. During the convention, attendance was spotty at best, with many delegates disappearing for days on end. Some, in fact, never showed up at all. Several others prematurely walked out in protest over the direction of the new Constitution as well. By the end, out of the 55 delegates who actually did show up, only 39 lent their signatures to what we now know as the American Constitution. The problem for many delegates rested in the idea of adopting a stronger national government. Many believed in the original ideals of letting each colony run itself mostly, if not entirely, how they saw fit. that a stronger national government would put a damper on the freedoms, culture, and economic desires of each state. Supporters of this ideology would become known as anti-federalists and would include names such as Thomas Jefferson and the before-mentioned Adams, Henry, and Hancock. On the other side of that coin were the Federalists, who, as we covered at the start, believed in the need for a stronger national government in order to keep a young and fragile nation intact moving into the 19th century. Supporters of this viewpoint included George Washington, John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison, who would eventually pen the Bill of Rights. In the end, the Federalists got their way, but not without some major concessions to appease their anti-Federalist counterparts. It was widely feared that a stronger national government would lead to eventual dominance over the free states in ways akin to the monarchy that America had just fought to remove itself from, and states wanted guarantees that this would not happen. This tension between the two factions of Federalists and Anti-Federalists would lead to a system of checks and balances within a national government the world had never seen before. The Constitution gave this nation a unique form of government that, to put it briefly, made ultimate power nearly impossible to be had. 3 branches of government designed to get in each other's way, representation from every state on 2 different levels, a right for the populace to vote, an electoral college to stand in the way of mob rule, a way to oust political leaders, a separate non-political body for interpreting the founding documents, and the ability for states to convene in absence of the federal government in order to make changes as to how the federal government operates. These are just some of the many unique and at the time unprecedented things found in the Constitution, and if you've never done it before, you really need to give it a read. But for many, this was not enough. While 12 of the 13 colonies had lent signatures to it, many of them as a whole were refusing to ratify it, citing that the new federal government's powers were too broad and left very little in regards to the people and their rights. The consensus view among anti-federalists was the language in the Constitution was vague in many ways regarding how the national government viewed the citizenry and what exactly said government could impose on them at will. They wanted even more guarantees, and they wanted it in the form of a Bill of Rights. Many colonies already had their own Bill of Rights for their citizens, but if the federal government was going to gain more control, then a Bill of Rights would then need to be required on a federal level. But Federalists were largely opposed to a national Bill of Rights, viewing it as entirely unnecessary. They felt the language in the Constitution was actually very clear, that the national government was not even allowed to interfere in great part with the states or the citizens already. It was believed that the principles of federalism were based in the idea of natural rights by design, that the mere practice of federalism made it impossible to violate people's rights in any way due to the fact that federalism assumed any and all rights of the people by default, named or unnamed. That belief led Federalists to fear that if the national government were to institute a list of specifically recognized rights, future generations of government might violate any right not listed without legal restraints. Now, during these heated debates, one man sat quietly, day by day, with quill, ink, and paper, taking vigorously detailed notes on all that was said, who said it, and included his own ideas as well. This man was James Madison, and before he would go on to become the 4th President of the United States, he somewhat reluctantly shouldered the task of appeasing his anti-federalist counterparts with the National Bill of Rights. Thanks to James Madison, we know in great detail what exactly happened at these closed-door proceedings, and it's very clear that everyone there was afraid of a large and powerful national government. They just had different answers for how to avoid it. Now, there are many fascinating things that happened when it was Madison's turn to speak, but for the purposes of staying on topic, we're going to jump ahead here a little bit, but I do encourage you to look up this part of the story yourself, though. There were many things that eventually convinced Madison to undertake the creation of the Bill of Rights. One being the fact that the most important goal of the meeting of Congress was to keep the nation together and to devise a strong national government who would be able to properly do that. That couldn't be done without a certain percentage of approval from all the colonies. They were on the cusp of success with this new constitution. The argument for a Bill of Rights was really all that stood in the way. Another important influence on Madison was a correspondence between him and Thomas Jefferson during this time. Jefferson, a vehement anti-federalist, convinced Madison that if he truly believed the Bill of Rights wasn't necessary due to the principles of federalism, and that it would serve as nothing but mere formality, then what could it possibly hurt to include it? Especially if it appeased his opponents enough to reach the desired goal. This is what eventually pushed Madison over the edge, and he agreed to draft a national Bill of Rights. Now, what is a Bill of Rights? This is a very deep question, and it's not easily answered. Essentially, though, a Bill of Rights is a decree from a government that it recognizes the rights of its citizens and understands that it cannot interfere with them. This is a very important distinction, and it really cannot be overstated. A Bill of Rights does not grant people their rights. It is not a governmental decree that gives people their rights. It recognizes that people already have these rights, that they are born with them, and that they, as a government, cannot violate them without risk of disrupting the laws of nature. Basically, your government doesn't give you your rights, you have them simply by being alive on this earth. The reason this was so important to anti-federalists and all Americans at the time really was because in a monarchy or dictatorship, the principles of divine right were the law of the land. Divine right was the belief that nobility, due to their status as nobles, had permission from God himself to rule the world as they saw fit, regardless of how their citizenry was affected. This meant that if they wanted to levy impossible taxes, they could. Raid your village and rape your daughters? They could. Execute you for being a Catholic, Jew, or Protestant? They could. Imprison you just because? They could. And they did. The belief in divine right was a philosophy used by cultures all over the world for tens of thousands of years in order to allow a select few to control, without mercy, everyone else. This was in direct contrast to the belief in natural law, which was and continues to be a huge piece of the American ethos. Natural law is the recognition that all inhabitants on this planet, human and non-human alike, operate as free inhabitants of the planet when left unmolested. Philosophers of the laws of nature looked to the animal kingdom and studied how other animals existed in their natural state without government or God to interfere. They noticed that animals travel where they want to, accompany themselves near whomever or whatever they choose. They have teeth and claws and barbs for defending themselves against predators. They have the will and desire to survive. They raise their young in their own fashion. They defend their territory, but mainly leave other animals alone as they live out their own lives. They build shelters in accordance to their own needs. They roar, click, shriek, chatter, hiss, and scream at will without interference. And when these behaviors and instincts were interfered with, those who studied these actions noticed that grave imbalances and harm were done to both the animals and the environment around them. It was these observations, along with several others, that convinced philosophers of natural law that man, being just as much an animal as any other, was also entitled to these things, and that such interferences over the course of human existence had not only dampened man's evolution, it sometimes almost entirely destroyed it. Now, it had been widely accepted that no civilized society could survive or prosper without some form of cohesion. A government was necessary, but it could only be truly effective if it, too, obeyed the edicts of natural law. That a government's role was not to interfere with its people, but rather work for its people, to ensure that natural law was always allowed to flourish. It was these principles of both man in his natural state and what role government should play within it which led to what became known as the Enlightenment and was obviously very popular with many colonists during the second half of the 18th century. But colonial America in the 1700s was not where these principles began. The Pilgrims of the 17th century had fled England in order to practice their faiths as they saw fit. The Dutch had become a haven for all religious faiths a century earlier than that. The Magna Carta of 1215 instilled with it the ideals of property rights and due process even a king had to obey. And the ancient Greeks divided power with the Senate and allowed their citizenry to be heard through voting. All of these beliefs and histories were compiled to influence each American colony to create their own state's Bill of Rights. And while no two were exactly the same, many of them did list the same things. It was where Madison went to inspire the National Bill of Rights. He studied each colony's own doctrines and originally compiled a list of hundreds of rights. This was obviously problematic, as it would have taken a whole Bible-sized book at the time to compile them, as well as created a scenario of an endless debate over them amongst Federalists and Anti-Federalists. So Madison was tasked with a new challenge. How could the national government recognize every right a citizenry had by the laws of God and nature, while also keeping it as brief as a mere formality should be? In the end, and we are skipping over a little bit again, Madison came to Congress with 12 rights proposed for the National Bill of Rights. 2 were stricken down almost immediately, and we'll talk more about those in later episodes. What remained was 10, and they are the 10 original amendments we have in the Bill of Rights today. Our First Amendment, the right to free speech, a free press, freedom of and from religion, and to peacefully assembly and protest of our government. Our Second Amendment, the right to maintain our own state militia, as well as privately owned weapons for our own self-defense. Our Third Amendment, the right to not have military use our homes as quarters during times of peace, and only maybe during times of war. Our Fourth Amendment, essentially the right to privacy and property, neither of which can be breached or confiscated without a warrant backed by just cause. Our Fifth Amendment, the right to a grand jury, due process of law, the right against self-incrimination and double jeopardy, as well as the right for just compensation for any deprivation of property. Our Sixth and Seventh Amendments, the right to a speedy and public trial, right to jury in both civil and criminal court, a right to know what you're being accused of, a right to face and question your accusers, a right to establish your own defense, and a right to a lawyer. Our Eighth Amendment, a right against excessive bails or fines as well as cruel and unusual punishments. Our Ninth Amendment, a recognition that any right not listed in the Bill of Rights is still a right granted by the laws of nature to the people, and our 10th Amendment, the recognition of any and all powers not listed in the Constitution remaining in the hands of the state or its citizenry. Now, for the first 77 years of its existence, the National Bill of Rights only applied at the federal level, meaning that only the federal government was bound to abide by these recognitions. State governments were still allowed to do whatever they wanted, and there is a long, brutal history of them doing just that. In 1868, the 14th Amendment was passed, which eventually paved way to mandating that all states were to abide by the U.S. Bill of Rights. By 1926, that mandate came to near full fruition. There are some caveats to this within certain states even to this day, but that is a whole different can of worms for another episode. I doubt we'll be covering it much in this series, but we'll see. Since the original 10 amendments in the Bill of Rights was ratified in 1791, 17 others have been added, some which belong and some which are either constitutionally contradicting or at the very least misplaced, belonging more within a new section of the Constitution rather than the Bill of Rights. One amendment actually includes a so-called right for Congress to be paid more and more. Yeah, not all of them are that amazing. But regardless of the others, it's the original 10 which are the most important today, and which are the most continually debated, deciphered, and applied in our day-to-day lives. That's because all other added amendments, at least the ones that properly fit into a Bill of Rights, simply just add on a group of people whom the original 10 now apply to. Former slaves, for example. Some amendments don't even apply anymore, like the one that prohibits alcohol. Even with the unnecessary or unfitting amendments, the original 10 Amendment stands today as the biggest reason for America's success. By a government finally getting out of the way, the American people, while exercising those liberties throughout the last 238 years, have done more for the advancement of the human race and spirit than any other people before them. Never before in the history of the world has there been such a rapid, explosive progress in the human condition. The Gilded Age, the end of slavery, the Industrial Revolution, the advancements in technology, culture, and science, the tolerance movements, the vast array of goods and services at cheap prices, and the fastest increase in wealth for a population the world has ever known, all of which was never even a thing in human society until America hit the scene. It is due to our Bill of Rights, those finely tuned edicts of freedom, that we have to thank for that. When people are allowed to live their way by their means, they are capable of many wondrous and incredible things. With that said, it is so very vital to know your constitutionally recognized rights, to understand that they are, again, not granted to you by the government, but yours naturally, and that the government simply recognizes them as such. But you also have to understand where they came from, what their roots are. The founders of this country knew that eventually the system would become corrupt, that ambitious men would work hard to deprive you of these God-given liberties. Men are flawed, after all, and what is government but systems created and run by man? That's why there are things in the Constitution that are put in place for the people to prevent that. Article 5, for example, which you've heard me speak about before. But there is no greater weapon against the tyranny of the ambitious than knowledge of what it is they seek to destroy. How can you protect your rights when you don't even know what they are, where they came from, or why you have them? Hopefully now you have at least the start of the answer as to where and why. As I said before, the philosophy of the where and why I will leave to you. As for the what, we'll begin that next show by diving into the First Amendment. There's quite a lot to unpack within it, and it is widely accepted as the most essential of all recognized rights, so it's not a piece of the series you'll want to miss. There's always more to the topic than what you're shown on the surface. We attempt to expose beyond the tip of the iceberg by going deep, and we encourage you to always strive to see things for what they really are and make your own conclusions. Hopefully, we've given you some perspective today regarding this very important topic. The rest is up to you. Hey everyone, hope you're enjoying the show. Just wanted to quickly encourage you to like and subscribe wherever you're listening from. We can be found anywhere you listen to podcasts. And if you think you know someone who might like the show, give our podcast a share. 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts also help tremendously as well. Either way, we'd really appreciate it. And if you ever want to reach out to us directly, you can do so by emailing ontheblock@outlook.com. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, complaints, or criticisms, we want to hear from you. Also, if there's anything you'd like us to look into, discuss more of, maybe you're in a band and you want us to play one of your songs, whatever the case may be, just reach out by emailing ontheblock@outlook.com. We look forward to hearing from you. And now back to the show. This is Restoring the Faith. It is a dark and grimy world out there with a lot of fucked up shit going on. But just when you think that the world couldn't get any worse, or just when you think we might be headed over the edge into some sort of dark abyss of which there is no going back, there are people and places, statistics, situations, and stories out there that hopefully make you feel a little better about our future moving forward. Helping to restore your faith this time around is a 13-year-old boy who raised $6,000 through GoFundMe this last Christmas to buy presents for a bunch of kids at a homeless shelter whose parents lost everything in the midst of COVID. Think about this for a second. A 13-year-old boy having the wherewithal to sit there and say, you know what I want to do today? I want to help people less fortunate than me. This fine young individual is named Jackson Turner. He's from Texas, and as I said, raised nearly $6,000 through social media and GoFundMe in order to supply a bunch of homeless kids in the inner city with sneakers and toys and hot meals. That is amazing. This young man's quoted as saying, I think we need to help them because so many families during this pandemic are losing their jobs or their houses, and moms are already worrying about being homeless. Why should they also have to worry about Christmas for their kids too? Now, goddamn, if that doesn't restore your faith, I know I say this all the time, but come on. Your faith has to be restored just a little bit, right? And this is not just a one-off thing. Apparently, he runs an organization called Never Too Young to Care, in which he collects money for families year-round, including an annual Easter and Christmas thing where he gives toys and food and hot meals to people. He also covers topics of domestic violence, raising money for people in situations of the domestic violent variety. This young man is amazing. I mean, this kid really is amazing. I mean, think about it. When's the last time you raised $6,000 for anybody, for anything? And you know what's so impressive about this kid is that he's learning something very, very valuable right now, something that most 13-year-olds don't know. I certainly didn't know that 13. In fact, millennials for sure didn't know this at 13, or their behavior wouldn't be what it is today. This young man is learning that if you see a problem, that if you notice something needs to be done, you don't ask somebody else to do it. You don't blame someone else and expect someone over here to do it. You don't ask the government or anybody else like that. You roll up your sleeves and you do what you can yourself. Not one person can do everything, but everybody can do something. And this kid is learning that valuable lesson right now. Now, the cynic in me says, I'm sure there's somebody taking advantage of this poor kid's hard work and generosity. And this kid's working his ass off, and he's doing this all out of the goodness of his own heart. Hopefully he doesn't become jaded. And you know what? I don't think he will. I don't think he will because, again, the lesson he's learning of hard work and doing something yourself, because no one else is going to do it. You got to do it. If you see something wrong, you go out there and you do your part to make it right. That's incredible. That's an incredible lesson for a young man his age. That's an incredible lesson for anyone. It's a lesson I wish my generation would heed at some point in time. If we weren't going to learn it when we were younger, fine, it is what it is, but we're all in our 30s now. Grow the fuck up. Take some notes from this kid. This kid's doing wonderful, amazing things. If you want to learn more about Jackson Turner and how you might be able to help him help others, just look him up, Never Too Young to Care, and see about donating or doing what you can do today. Amazing story. If there were more Jackson Turners in the world, in this country today, we would be in great shape moving forward. That's my opinion anyway. And that's going to do it for us this week. Hope you have a lot of fun hanging out with us. We sure have a lot of fun hanging out with you. I hope you really got something out of that first episode of the Bill of Rights series. There is so much rich history and philosophy that we just kind of glazed over for purposes of just kind of, getting it out there in a short segment. But there really is a lot to the philosophy of natural law and enlightenment, and I encourage you to go look it up. Our rights are so important, and we're going to need them now more than ever, and we really need to know what they are. Not knowing them, not knowing how to apply them, not knowing where they came from, it's no longer an option anymore. Once again, this has been On the Block with Bryce, and we'll see you next time.